Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room. I'm Robin Adair, and joined as always with my co-host with the most, John Juricic. And John, last couple of weeks, you've been singing "Oh Canada." It's getting lots of feedback. Not a lot of music agents stepping forward and saying, "God, we got to get your record cut." But I think people, they appreciate the emotion. They appreciate the fact you're showing some patriotism, because goodness knows, with Donald Trump out there, we need it. And it's amazing to see the amount of nationalism across the country. We had Flag Day, the flags are up, and we've had lots of reaction during the hockey games, and that national anthem comes on. People are blasting "Oh Canada." Unfortunately, maybe booing the United States too much, but I don't know, that's a judgment call. But so much going on, John, around Donald Trump and his threats.
Two parts to this, okay? It's so great to see the word. I have never sang the national anthem in any kind of public arena outside of area outside of an arena. I go
maybe in the shower.
Maybe in the shower. I don't think so. But on July 1st, yes, I'm there downtown. We're celebrating Canada Day, but nothing like the passion that is going on right now. Okay, something's changed. There's been a schism. All right, and here's the second part of that two-part explanation. Why did it have to take him to get it out of us? That orange guy. As you know, all we got to do is listen to him every couple of minutes berate us, calling for Canada to be a 51st state, to see really red. Well, in his case, maybe orange.
Canada's been very bad to us on trade, but now Canada's going to have to start paying up. And Canada's been tough on the military because they have a very low military cost. They think we're going to, protect them with our military, which is unfair. So Canada's going to be a very interesting situation because, we just don't need their product. And yet they survive off the fact that we do 95% of what they do. And Canada is just absolutely, I say it, and sometimes people smile and sometimes they say, great idea, but Canada, their taxes would come down greatly. Their security would go up greatly. Amazing things happen to Canada. And really Canada in this particular, why would we pay $200 billion a year in subsidies to Canada when they're not a state? You do that for a state, but you don't do that for somebody else's country. So I think Canada is going to be a very serious contender to be our 51st state.
So the question is, do we have a lot to be worried about with Donald Trump as the month peels away? I think we do. I think things are looking very serious. We've already seen the 25% tariff on aluminum and steel. I think he's going to follow through, at least in the short term. It's going to be tough on Canada. It's going to be tough on the world. And he is turning his guns in all sorts of directions, but especially towards Canada. And it's really going to turn the apple cart over in North America in terms of moving trade. And I think the Mexicans they got to be as upset as we are, if not more so. This is really a difficult situation. And so what are American thinkers thinking? Well, the top podcaster in the United States, curiously, used to be one of Donald Trump's chief advisor. And they kind of had a bit of a falling out. But Steve Bannon still follows Donald Trump very closely. And he spoke to Brian Lilley from the Toronto Sun. They had a very fulsome conversation. And it turns out, according to Bannon, he believes that Trump is really upset at Canada, not so much because of the drugs going across the border, but because we haven't kept up with our commitments to maintain our military might, to protect North America from the incursion of the Russians through the Arctic or the Chinese through the Arctic. And he thinks that's the bee in the bonnet and that we should be paying attention to Donald Trump. Here's Steve Bannon.
I think of everything he's working on. I tell people, I think the hemispheric defense, because it also underpins his new business model for the United States, which we are in a very tough financial situation. I tell people, I don't know if he's got a higher priority than hemispheric defense.
But does that necessarily mean, I mean, his latest word to describe it is absorbing Canada? Does that mean the United States has to absorb Canada? How do you work together?
The form of that is to be determined. Remember, President Trump is a master deal maker, but I do think, just like he's making a deal now in about Ukraine getting that war done, he's doing a deal in the Middle East to get that done. He's a deal guy. He's a deal guy. You know, clearly, the Canadian people have to make up their mind about what they want to do and where they want to go and who they want to be affiliated with. But I think that conversation, those discussions and that debate should commence. He's obsessed with this issue of Canada. So now I think there will be, what form it takes. I don't speak for the president. That's the president, and he's got ideas about how he wants to see things evolve. I would talk to, but I believe that leaders in Canada, I think he is waiting for however it plays out for the new government. I do believe they're going to have serious talks.
One of the more frustrating reactions to all of this is that you don't know what to react to. Given the day or time or comment or occasion, it changes. What we do know, despite what Bannon is saying, is that things are fundamentally changed. And Trump has a different view of the world than we've been living with since the world wars. Okay, that sort of balance, that puzzle, he's ripping it apart. Who knows where the pieces will land? So, okay, Bannon, thank you, but we'll wait to see when and if he finally says something for real that we can react to with objective thinking. So where does this leave us? Many Canadians seem to be drifting, maybe more than drifting, to the rally cry of the federal Liberals. Yay, go red. And Mark Carney promises to stand up to Trump. Really? Like he's going to be the guy? Oh, okay, whatever. While at the same time, he wants to save the environment. Read the room, Carney. So what about this carbon tax? Here's a CBC interview where he gives us some insight.
And just to be clear, in terms of removing the consumer carbon tax, that also means we're removing the carbon tax for small, medium-sized enterprises, for farms and others, basically everyone up to 50 kilotons of emissions. So it's the large polluters that pay.
Okay, but you acknowledge that the consumer would pay more at some point.
Well, the consumer is already paying more.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, the consumer is already paying more. These are marginal amounts.
In other words, business pays a carbon tax and then passes it on to consumers. What's the difference? There is momentum, maybe tsunami, to not have a carbon tax of any kind anymore. Like I said before the interview clip, read the room. Just a new way for taxpayers to pay.
And, Pierre Poilievre has made that point. He's had to change his language quite a bit over the last couple of weeks. This axe the tax stuff, I think it's pretty clear. The carbon tax as it is not going to continue after this next election, and it will not be the main campaign item. National unity will be a big factor. And I also think it's going to be, will we open the taps? Will we move on our resources? Will we build the pipelines? Will we make that the first and foremost way of rebuilding stability and rebuilding the economic well-being of our country in the face of Trump and all the terrible things that are going on? I mean, here, Trump is going to meet with Putin behind the Ukrainians' back and just arbitrarily settle a terrible conflict that's been going on for 3 years. He's turning his back on NATO. He's going to turn the Gaza into a theme park if he can. There's all these things going on right now, and it's too early to call the federal election in Canada. It's getting tighter because, let's face it, the Liberals have a lot of time on television right now, especially on CBC. CBC hates Poilievre and the Conservatives because they're saying they're going to cut CBC funding. Who can blame them? But I mean, what's going to take place, I think, over the next few months is going to be a back and forth seesaw to capture the minds and hearts of Canadians. And we've seen this scenario before. I mean, there have been examples where we've had parties that were starting to wear out. We had Gordon Campbell. He got into the HST, some other problems that really people began to say he's been there too long. We've got to have a change. And it looked like the NDP was going to surge. Adrian Dix was running for office. But lo and behold, Christy Clark comes marching in and she wins the election. Now, Adrian Dix helped her, but she was able to win the election, reinvent the BC Liberals at least for another term. And this does happen. On the flip side, sometimes it doesn't. If you look at people like Kim Campbell after Brian Mulroney, Rita Johnson after Bill Vander Zalm, it doesn't always work out. We'll have to wait for the outcome on that. But I want to talk more about what we can expect in this coming race in terms of, can Mark Carney come out of the weeds, lead the federal Liberals to glory again, and somebody who's very familiar with all of this, the things I've just talked about and more. And there's even a Rich Coleman book. It's called That's Rich by Judy Tyabji. You can always pick that up. But anyway, we're gonna do more than just pick up the book. We're gonna pick up the phone. We're gonna pick up Rich Coleman on Zoom and ask him about this situation. Let's zoom him in. Now joining us again in the Rumble Room for the first time, I believe, in 2025, if I'm not mistaken, is Rich Coleman. And Rich, it's so great to have you back on the show. And I was saying in the intro leading up to this that you know as well as anybody about how miraculously people can come out of nowhere and win an election. And we've seen it with Christy Clark, where it looked like the NDP was going to win for sure. Gordon Campbell had been in for a long time. Suddenly Christy's able to throw together a win. Of course, Adrian Dix kind of helped her, but these things can happen. On the other hand, you can have the Kim Campbell scenario where it doesn't work out so well. Now we have Mark Carney coming up very quickly. The polls are showing that both the NDP and Liberal vote are coalescing and they're building some momentum. Mind you, he hasn't actually been made the prime minister yet. He hasn't won, but there's a lot of talk about it. It looks like it could be a neck-and-neck campaign. What do you think the downside of all of this is? Is it too early to pronounce him a winner when the election is still a ways away?
Oh, it's way too early, Robin. I remember being told by my brother, the political scientist, in January of 2013 that I should probably have had a good career. Why are you hanging around in 2013? I mean, after all, you're 26 points behind, the NDP at the time, and what are you doing? And I said, well, we're going to win. And I said, all I have to do is have Christy Clark at 16 points behind on election day, and I think I was running the campaign, and I said, we'll get it done. And so I think momentum in campaigns are incredible. I think a lot of people sometimes get complacent. I think the Conservatives did for a bit. They're thinking, well, we've got Trudeau on the ropes. And I would say to them and other people in the political realm, remember, you're not likely to be running against Trudeau. And so this will change. And it has. It's moved a number of points, not enough to be what I would say a big momentum killer at this point in time. People haven't had a chance to see whether this guy's got any dynamics or charisma, if it happens to be Carney or any of the other of them. So the rest of them are all part of the government that's been around for 10 years and are all running away from their record.
But I guess it's also a question. It's also a question of the whole platform of the campaign has changed in the sense it was going to be axe the tax. That's all we heard from Poilievre for the last year, and now suddenly magically it's waving the Canadian flag and we got to stand up to Trump. The message has changed. Can the Conservatives change on a dime?
Oh, I think they can. I think they will. I think they all do. I mean, you've seen the Liberals change on a dime, maybe even a penny for that matter, how quickly they run away from the carbon tax and all the other things that are unpopular with Canadians. And it depends how you craft the message and what you do with Pierre Poilievre's message from here and the Conservative message from here as far as being competitive. We all have to remember that this campaign is won in the 905 area code in Southern Ontario. So the Liberals have always had an advantage there, historically, because the immigration piece has always been sort of the piece for people that have come to this country. It's more the Liberals that are in favor than the others. And so you have a tendency for people to gravitate back a bit. But there are a lot of other issues facing Canadians on affordability, on food and inflation and all the other things. So,
and if I could get into this with you, Rich, first of all, thank you. Thanks to have you come back. We always never know. We never know if people want to come back with us. So thank you.
You guys are too much fun not to do it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, certainly there's a lot of content these days. I know that energy was always a top priority when you were in government. Mark Carney now is talking about removing the carbon tax. Or is he? Or is he not? Or is he? But taxing big carbon producers, which would still pass on costs to all of us, sounds like he still wants to run on a green economy. As I mentioned to Robin in some recent discussions, Read the room. Is this still a good way of winning the hearts and minds of Canadians?
Well, I don't believe it is. I think what the problem with Canadians is we're not positive enough about how good we are at what we do in the energy sector. So first of all, we have more clean energy in Canada in most places in the world with our hydroelectric and our other stuff. Our oil patch is actually the cleanest in the world. We don't flare like you see on the most recent Netflix or Prime video show that, called Landman, where they're all showing all this flaring in the oil patch. That's not taking place here. We're sequestering. We're handling it different. We're handling the water with saline water from deep in the earth and re-injecting it versus taking it out of the freshet. So our energy industry is very clean. And instead of being apologetic about it, be unapologetic about it, stand up and help them create the more technology to get cleaner yet, and encourage the investment to get it done.
So, we have a situation now where we've already seen the 25% tariff on aluminum and steel, thanks to Donald Trump, and he seems like he's rubbing his hands to do more by the end of the month, and we'll know how bad that could be. You, of course, have had a front side seat to what happened in British Columbia when the Americans decided to start putting surcharges and tariffs on our lumber. And what we've seen with our lumber industry, our forest industry, which used to be king in British Columbia, and now it is struggling. Maybe you could just sort of talk about what led up to the problems with the forests and how we could learn things from that about how tough this whole situation can be with tariffs across the board and what we can do to remedy it.
I think the first thing is maybe a credential for me. I'm the only person negotiated a softwood lumber deal in North American and British Columbia history with the U.S. Lumber Trade Council and the U.S. government. The reality is that today we have duties at the border. We're probably at about 18 to 20% duties right now, maybe a bit higher. They're being charged at the border when our lumber goes south. We've been in this world ever since the last softwood lumber deal ran out in about 2015. At the border right now, I call it at the border, but let's call it at the trust money that's sitting there at the border from the duties because they're in dispute. There's $10 billion. $10 billion been paid by BC forest companies at the border to send our lumber to the United States. Someday that will get settled, maybe 5 or 6 billion to come back to our industry. It'll go to different trade arguments, what have you. So I think the first thing you have to understand is that the United States of America are not free traders. They are protectionists. They've been protectionists on lumber for as long as I can remember, and that goes back to 1970 when one of my brothers actually went to work for the Council of Forestry to work on the softwood lumber deal. And that's how long this has been going on. So that's the reality. The tariff coming on top of that is going to raise the duties and tariffs on BC lumber to 55%. That's very difficult. And it's very difficult because, in some ways, but in other ways, the price of lumber is up right now. So there is some play. But the bottom line is it's going to be choking. Now, at the same time that has happened, you have a government in BC that's gone way beyond what used to be the old forest practices code and what the regulations, rules, and little things and application permits and times and everything it takes time to get done to cut wood has made it virtually uneconomical to be able to go out and cut a piece of timber. In addition to that, they've been raising the stumpage rates. So right now, if you want to do something for lumber in BC, the government should step back and say, you know what? And this is what I'd do. I'd say, you know what? California really is going to need our lumber. So what we're going to do is we're going to not charge stumpage. We're going to speed up our process so we can send our lumber, not because of profit, send our lumber to help our American friends in California. That would be a way better message to the U.S. government than having a bunch of premiers with the tails between their legs go down to Washington, D.C., meet with a mid-level person at the White House and claim and think that they're doing anything to counter the issues in and around the tariffs that they face in Canada.
Attaboy, Rich! Attaboy! Love it. Oh, that was fabulous. That got me all tingly. All right, let's deal with another thing. Listen, you were a Solicitor General once. You're also a former police officer. And of course, this is the issue. One of the issues now is drugs around the border and meth and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of us don't have any clue what's true and what isn't. Is more policing the answer to these problems? The smuggling of hard drugs like crystal meth across the border would more policing make a difference? They've just busted a large drug ring in BC. I don't know, comparatively speaking, how big that is, but they say it's a big one. What happens to these guys that are caught, and how does this fit into everything that's going on along the border now?
The one thing we might want to go get away from is that little Johnny had something happen to him when he was younger, and therefore he's got to be let off when he wants to do a criminal enterprise that actually kills people, and actually do something disciplinary to him and put him in jail and teach him a bloody lesson. I'm sick and tired of this piece of a justice system that just rolls people over and makes excuses for bad behavior. There is no excuse for this bad behavior. Fentanyl kills people. I believe that we should have woken up a long time ago and said, okay, if we got a beater, we can tack him right back to somebody that's got the fentanyl, and that fentanyl killed him, then maybe we should be charging him for manslaughter because they actually killed a human being. And quit being so nice about this, and quit being about the fact, we'll give you free drugs, and oh, I don't know how you became an addict because we want to give you drugs on the street. This is nonsensical. The bottom line is that the President of the United States called, the U.S. cartels, a terrorist organization, wants to designate them as such. And Canada sort of bought into that with some of the organization. But what they won't talk to themselves about is this. Fentanyl comes in, most of the precursors comes in from places like China. It's coming through our ports, but not just our ports. Seattle, Long Beach, Los Angeles, all the way down San Diego, down the West Coast, and other ports across North America and Eastern North America as well. And they like to push it away and say that it's all coming in from Canada. It's not coming all in from Canada, right? You have a problem. And you have some organized crime that we could identify in those ports on your side of the country, and you don't even mention them, and you don't even admit to the fact that you've got organized crime gangs and organizations that you should also be designating as terrorist organizations and going after them to stop the flow of these drugs. It's easy to deflect. Be honest about what's going on in your own backyard, before you start blaming what's going on in other people's backyards.
I find it interesting that, we say that we don't have enough money even now for the amount of policing that we have, and yet we've been reluctant as a society to in any way or shape or form increase the number of people we have in our armed forces. I know in Mexico, the armed forces are totally involved in fighting with the cartels and trying to suppress what's going on with drugs being smuggled, and yet in Canada, we are well under the 2% we are committed to in terms of our armed forces. I mean, if we even move towards moving to our responsibility, perhaps some of those people could be deployed in roles like that. It's not what you would call a classic military role, but it's certainly the sort of role that other military forces are undertaking in other parts of the world. Was that ever anything you contemplated when you were in office, Rich?
Well, we didn't have the same issues at the time. Our policing, actually, I rebuilt policing in BC in 2001, because it was so understaffed and the previous government underfunded. So we actually redid build the number and complement of police officers across BC, particularly in the provincial force. We were able, in the fires of 2003, to move 1,000 military personnel from Edmonton to BC to help with the fires in a very quick order, because we had the personnel in the military in Canada. The failure to our military, both reservist and full-time service people, and I'm very familiar with this one, is a failure of successive governments. It's not just a liberal, it's also a conservative. We go back 20, 25 years of governments that have failed to actually step up, modernize our military, keep our men and women safe, build the platform and the equipment, and get what they need. And it is time that we decide as a country, and let's just admit it, 2% of our GDP. You could probably find where we're wasting 2% of our GDP. That money should be invested. We should be meeting our responsibilities to our commitment to NATO, and quit making excuses that, we'll take it up to 1.5% next year and 1.6% the year after. No, bite the bullet, buy the equipment, which is part of the commitment of what you're spending in that 2% of GDP, modernize your military, make it popular for people again to come in and join as reservists, and build this back up for us as citizens of Canada, and go back and take our place where we deserve to be in the world.
This is fabulous. It leads perfectly into my question, because I kind of know the answer, but I want to hear it again. All right. Liberals had a nice bump here, in large part because they were sort of pushing back against Trump. And we were all patriotic, and we are patriotic, and we're supporting that messaging. But guess who else is doing great? Doug Ford in Ontario, Conservative. So, this is not entirely party lines. This is whoever can stand up to the bully. Okay. Please give us your advice now with regard to how do we do that? Okay. How do governments, red, yellow, green, blue, how do we stand up to this man? And I've heard folks going, we should negotiate. Screw that. I don't feel that way right now. I suppose there's some element that has to do that, but don't tell me to negotiate with that man.
Okay, you've opened the door.
I'm opening it. I want you to just crash
Hold on to your chair. I'm going to give you some opinions, and then I'm going to give you my thoughts. Okay, my first opinion is Doug Ford looked like he was going to be Captain Canada until he decided for personal reasons to run an election to get a majority in the middle of a trade crisis. I hope the people of Ontario understand that what he's doing now isn't for his province, but for his ego. Because why would you do that when you don't have to go to the polls for 18 months? That was a nonsensical political move to me, and it may work out for him. But in my opinion is he vacated the field. He's now in an interregnum period. He doesn't have the ability to govern because he has to leave it to an interim group of people while the writ's going on until the writ's over and he wins, and then he forms another government. He doesn't have the ability to pass a budget or direct or spend or whatever. But let's look at this thing differently, all right? People criticize Danielle Smith because she went down to meet with Donald Trump. What Danielle Smith did was what any smart negotiator would do. And say, who do we know that knows the person we have to deal with? Who can we get in the door with some credibility to have an adult conversation? Well, she did that with I think it was O'Leary, right? So she did that. That's how she gets in the door. We have a group of these people, I'm going to call them lemmings for a moment. I'll get in trouble for this, that we call premiers in this country.
Hey,
so
look,
what do they do?
I consider them lemmings, so they can blame me.
So they go down, they head down to the U.S. as a bunch. They don't really have a plan. They don't seem to know what they've got for leverage in their own country. They certainly don't use it in any public discussion. And they go down, they're all excited they're going to see a mid-level person at the White House, for crying out loud. The King of Jordan got in to see the president, right? I mean, this is the most ineffectual way you could do it. When I did software, I said, we're not going to Washington. We're running our war room from BC, and we're building our message and organization to win this discussion and get this trade deal done here, not sitting down in Washington, you guys all paying a couple $1,000s an hour for lawyers. So look at it this way, and I'll give you a quickie. So think about it. There are barges that go down the west coast of British Columbia carrying gravel that help build California. That is land, that's gravel is coming from islands of ours and dredging of ours from BC to California. In Langley, BC, there's a place called the Bunker. The Bunker is where the entire grid in BC, Washington State, Oregon, and Northern California is managed by. The backup power for that entire grid is British Columbia Power. We actually control the electrons. We can move power in and power out, and we've created the only really integrated power system in the United States. And that takes a bit of Idaho, and it takes some of California. The United States power grid is such a mess that their companies have not invested. So you saw 100-mile winds take out the power in a fire in California because the power lines are all above ground. So that gets blown down, and now pumps don't work and water pressure doesn't work and all. So they have a challenge internally to their country, but our technology can help. We actually know where every electron is. We manage the power. We also manage power into Alberta, in BC, through BC Hydro's bunker that's in Langley, and it's basically bomb-proof, and that's why it's called the bunker. So we have power, we have a resource they need, and resource for managing for them. So you remind them of this. So that's just two things in BC. I'll move slightly over to South Okanagan. There's a huge fruit tree business in South Okanagan. You know why? Because of the Columbia River Treaty, which came from us building dams and us allowing that water be used for irrigation to grow grapes and fruit trees and all of that down there. Huge industry. If you go across this country, there's potash in Alberta, Saskatchewan. There's aluminum in northern British Columbia. There are rare earths here. We have massive, successful mines for copper, and copper is needed everywhere. We have so many resources across the country.
To say
And
nothing
the
of fresh water, Rich.
Yeah, well, I'm not really a big fan. I think I'm ever going to give them my water. So that one, I'm not building no. I wouldn't be supporting any water pipeline. But then you go into Ontario, you have the most integrated trading relationship in the auto pack. It won't work to tariff the auto pack. It won't work because all it'll do is make the U.S. cars much more expensive. And then internally to our own country, these premiers should have, when they got together and started talking about realizing that maybe we should do something in the country. Maybe we should have energy east and move resources across this country so Irving Oil isn't just getting oil from places like Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. Maybe they could be using Canadian oil, and those revenues are all, a lot of them would go into Quebec and the Maritimes anyway, and balance of payments from Western Canada could make some sense. You can say we're going to get more aggressive on LNG, and let's move the file. We can move that file if the NDP and the federal government would ever figure out that they can get a permit out sooner than 10, 12 years.
Great to hear from Rich Coleman. It's a reminder that usually provincial politics is a much bigger part of the Rumble Room, and it's been dwarfed by Donald Trump. And it's been dwarfed by what's going on with the federal government and the federal changes that are imminent, and perhaps the tariffs, a lot of big national problems. But just the same, we do have the provincial government, David Eby and company, returning to the legislature, and it should be interesting to see if they get much attention. It's actually not a bad time to be the Premier of BC. Not many people paying that close attention to what's going on, so we'll have to see if that changes, John. And certainly we'll be following that on the Rumble Room. Maybe you want to, again, draw people's attention to how people can follow our show on a regular basis, our new shiny website, and all the platforms that we operate on.
Yeah, and we sure do. And we get a lot of activity. If I could sort of circle back to a few of the comments we came about earlier, this sort of liberal bump federally. This is not terribly complicated. If for us to disentangle ourselves from the Americans and Donald Trump in particular, we need to get our resource engine working. Okay, this is not complicated. We do not have a huge, complicated, multi-tiered economy. There is mining, there is forestry, and there is energy extraction, and we got to get that to people other than the U.S. And the party that represents the best way of doing that is so far the Conservatives. And that will be who we end up voting for, because things will settle down, and eventually we're all going to go, who's the best person to attack the red one or the orange one? The orange one. And it won't.
It's interesting you say that, John, but the latest polls are showing a lot of New Democrats are now looking to the Liberals. They're looking to bolster the Liberals. They realize that Jagmeet Singh's not going to form a government, and they're rallying around that. And here we are in Victoria, which is very much a hotbed for the NDP. It's a very strong NDP region, Vancouver Island. Lots of those folks aren't planning on voting Conservative. They're planning on voting Liberal to keep the Conservatives out. I don't know if that's enough to do it. I think the momentum is shifting back and forth. Who knows where we'll be, but I also think we're going to have a snap election. I don't think if Mr. Carney wins, and I think all signs seem to indicate that he's going to wait very long. He's going to jump on the election trail as fast as possible as the champion of Canada, waving that flag heartily.
We've heard pundits indicate that if there's a coalition of the left, so-called, the NDP and the Liberals, then it will be tighter. And as you stated, that is most likely what is going on right now. But at some point, folks are going to go, as we have heard recently with this throne speech in BC, complaining that they have no money, complaining that they have to put hiring freezes on, complaining that they can't fulfill campaign promises. Well, who's been in power for 9 years? They have. Same with the libs. At some point you go, okay, things aren't working. Well, who did that? You guys did. Nonetheless, you can hear all about our interviews and our discussions and our ramblings on the Victoria Rumble Room on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube, and also on TikTok, Instagram, and we have a podcast version of the site as well. And we have a brand new website where all of these links are put together. And you can see the address on top or the bottom, wherever I'm choosing it to go this time. And thank you so much, Kelly Darwin of West Shore Web Hosting, for helping us do that. You know, there are a ton of people upset about Donald Trump and the threat of American sanctions. All of us. the fundamental relationship has changed. And don't, I hear some folks go, oh, well, let's negotiate with him. Let's chat with him. Sorry, read, as I said again, read the room. There's not a Canadian I know that wants that to happen, although it might be the better strategy. Right now, we're not negotiating. And that's because we're like to fight on hockey games. And we like to consider us very resilient people. And damn it, I'm a damn proud Canadian. I'm not going to sing today, Robin, but I'm ready to do the hard work ahead. I'm John Juricic.
Well, John, that was a wonderful, wonderful outlay of everything that we're dealing with right now and how to reach the show. And I'm so pleased that we've been getting such a great uptake on the shows that we've been doing on this important issue. I encourage you to continue to follow the Rumble Room. And what I promise you along the way is we will continue to rumble on.